True leadership isn't about control. It's about impact. And Maya had transformed the company, not with confrontation, but with excellence. 6 months later, the numbers spoke louder than any argument ever could. Coleman and Graves didn't just improve, it soared. The company hit record-breaking profits, surpassing projections by margins analysts called unprecedented. Market share expanded. Investor confidence surged. Financial news networks that once overlooked the firm now discussed it regularly. What had begun as a quiet ownership shift had turned into one of the most talked-about leadership transformations of the year. Business magazines featured Maya on their covers. She stood confidently against city skylines, inside modern offices beside bold headlines. The young chairwoman who transformed a legacy firm, redefining leadership in corporate America. From underrated to unstoppable, interviews poured in, podcast invitations, conference keynotes, television appearances, and eventually the story that had started it all made its way to the public. Yes, someone had leaked details about that first boardroom meeting. The laughter, the disbelief, the moment everything changed. Clips of commentary circulated online. Articles speculated about what it must have felt like. Social media debated the symbolism of it all. When reporters finally asked Maya about that now-viral incident, many expected sharp words, a powerful rebuttal, a public correction. But she didn't speak with bitterness. She didn't humiliate Richard. Instead, she smiled slightly and said something simple. Sometimes people laugh because the idea doesn't fit their expectations. That doesn't mean it isn't true. The quote spread quickly. It was calm, measured, wise, and it carried more strength than anger ever could. During one televised interview, Richard sat beside her. Months earlier, he had laughed at her claim of authority. Now, as the interviewer replayed the story, he didn't laugh. He nodded, because he had learned something valuable, something success alone had never taught him. He had built wealth. He had built influence. But Maya had built perspective. Watching her lead had forced him to confront assumptions he didn't even realize he carried. He had unconsciously defined leadership by familiarity, by what he had always seen at the head of the table. Maya had redefined it through performance, through clarity, through composure under pressure. Success, he realized, doesn't have a single face. Leadership doesn't come in one color. And authority doesn't always arrive in the package you expect. The day Maya walked into that boardroom, she wasn't just claiming a title written on legal documents. She was challenging assumptions that had existed for decades. She represented a new generation of leadership, one rooted in inclusion, innovation, and quiet confidence. And the millionaire who once laughed, he became one of her strongest supporters, not out of obligation, not because he was pushed aside, but because he saw the results with his own eyes. He watched employees thrive. He watched profits rise. He watched respect replace fear in meeting rooms. And he recognized true leadership when he saw it. Maya didn't demand respect loudly. She earned it steadily, through vision, through courage, through preparation when no one was watching, through excellence that could not be ignored. The laughter that once echoed through the boardroom faded into memory, replaced by collaboration, growth, and shared success. And in the end, the story was never about humiliation. It was about transformation, because sometimes the moment someone doubts you is the same moment your leadership truly begins. The entire boardroom went silent, and then came the laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was loud, mocking, dismissive, the kind of laugh meant to shrink someone. Richard Coleman, a self-made millionaire and senior partner at Coleman and Graves Investments, leaned back in his leather chair as if he owned not just the company, but the air in the room. His gold cufflinks flashed under the ceiling lights as he pointed slightly toward the young black woman standing at the head of the long mahogany table. "You?" he repeated, shaking his head slowly. "You're my boss." A few nervous chuckles followed from the far end of the table. No one wanted to laugh, but no one wanted to challenge him either. The woman didn't flinch. She stood calm and steady, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse. No flashy jewelry, No designer label screaming vead. Just quiet authority. Her expression didn't change. My name is Maya Thompson, she said clearly, her voice even and controlled. And yes, Mr. Coleman, as of this morning, I am the new majority shareholder and acting chairwoman of this company. The words didn't rise. It didn't tremble. They landed. Another ripple of disbelief spread across the room. One executive adjusted his tie. Another stared down at his tablet, as if it suddenly required urgent attention. Two board members exchanged confused glances, silently asking the same question. Is this real? Richard leaned forward now, folding his hands together. The smile on his face had sharpened. This is a joke, right? He said. Who let her in here? We're in the middle of a board meeting. His tone suggested security might be called at any second. But Maya didn't respond to the insult. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She didn't match his energy. Instead, she calmly reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a thick folder stamped with the company's official seal. The soft sound of paper hitting polished wood echoed louder than his laughter had. She slid copies across the table. I believe you'll find everything documented, she said. Acquisition agreements, transfer confirmations, legal endorsements. The room shifted. Richard's smirk remained, but it wasn't as confident. One by one, board members opened the folders. Pages turned, eyes scanned, brows furrowed. The company's chief financial officer blinked twice and looked up sharply. This can't be right, he whispered under his breath. But it was. The signatures were real. The numbers were precise. The ownership percentage was unmistakable. 51%, a majority stake. Richard reached for his copy, flipping through the pages faster than the others. His jaw tightened with each turn. Outside the glass walls of the boardroom, the city skyline stretched confidently into the morning light, unaware that power inside the room had just shifted. The laughter had stopped. The air felt heavier now. Maya stood exactly where she had been from the beginning, composed, steady, unshaken. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded respect. She had simply brought proof. And in that quiet moment, as the truth settled across the polished table, everyone in the room understood something important. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a joke. And the young woman they had underestimated, she wasn't asking for authority. She already had it. Just 24 hours earlier, news had quietly broken in the financial world. It wasn't front-page headline material. Not yet. It appeared first as a small alert on a private investor platform, then as a brief mention in a subscription-only financial newsletter. A mysterious investor had acquired 51% controlling interest in Coleman and Graves investments through a series of strategic purchases. The report was short, clinical, almost boring. But behind those few sentences was a calculated move that had been months in the making. Shares had been purchased slowly, carefully, never enough at once to raise suspicion. Minority stakeholders who had long felt overlooked were approached discreetly. Private meetings were held. Agreements were signed quietly in law offices and over secure video calls. By the time anyone noticed the pattern, it was already done. Ownership had shifted. No one knew who the buyer was. Not the media, not the employees, not even Richard Coleman. And that was the part that stung the most. For over 30 years, Richard had built Coleman and Graves from a two-person operation into a multi-million-dollar investment firm. He had survived market crashes, recessions, and ruthless competitors. He prided himself on control, precision, power. He believed he saw everything coming. But this had happened right under his nose. What Richard didn't realize was that many of his smaller investors had grown tired. Not of the profits. The company was doing well financially. But of the culture. Board meetings felt more like lectures. New ideas were often dismissed before being explored. Younger executives were rarely taken seriously. He was brilliant but arrogant, profitable but dismissive, and he had a habit of underestimating people, especially young professionals, especially women, and especially women of color. He didn't think of it as bias. In his mind, it was just experience. He trusted what looked familiar. Sounded familiar. Moved familiar. Maya Thompson didn't fit that mold, but she wasn't new to the industry. Far from it. She was a Harvard graduate with honors in economics, a financial strategist who had helped restructure struggling firms into profitable enterprises. The founder of a tech startup that used AI to predict investment trends, a company she had recently sold for over $200 million. Investors respected her. Analysts quoted her. Competitors studied her. But Richard had never heard of her. Why? Because he rarely looked beyond his inner circle of established names and longtime associates. If someone wasn't already inside his network, they barely existed in his world. Meanwhile, Maya had been watching, studying, waiting. She saw potential in Coleman and Graves, but she also saw stagnation. A legacy firm with strong foundations but outdated leadership patterns. And when the opportunity presented itself, she moved. Now, back in the boardroom, as members slowly opened the documents she had distributed, the air seemed to thin. Pages turned, eyes widened. The company seal was embossed clearly at the top of each agreement. Transfer confirmations were attached. Legal endorsements were signed by recognized authorities. The paperwork was clear, verified, signed, stamped. There were no loopholes, no technicalities, no misunderstandings. She didn't just hold a seat at the table. She owned the majority of it, a controlling 51%. Around the room, subtle shifts began to happen. Posture straightened. Expressions changed. The earlier smirks disappeared. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was fact. And as the reality settled in, one truth became undeniable. The mysterious investor wasn't mysterious anymore. She was standing right in front of them, and she owned the company. Richard's smile faded. The confidence that had filled the room just minutes earlier seemed to drain from his face. His fingers, which had been resting casually on the table, slowly curled inward. "This is impossible," he muttered under his breath. "There must be a mistake." But his voice didn't carry the same authority anymore. It carried uncertainty. Maya didn't react to his disbelief. She didn't rush to defend herself or repeat what had already been proven. Instead, she calmly turned her head toward the far end of the polished table. "Mr. Patel," she said evenly, "would you like to confirm?" All eyes shifted to the company's legal advisor. Mr. Patel had worked with Coleman and Graves for nearly 15 years. He was known for being precise, careful, and neutral. He adjusted his glasses slowly, buying himself a brief second before speaking. He reviewed the top page again, even though he had already read it twice. Then he cleared his throat. "The documents are legitimate," he announced, his voice steady but firm. "All acquisitions were conducted lawfully and verified through the proper regulatory channels. As of 8 a.m. today, Ms. Thompson is the majority shareholder and therefore the chairwoman of the board." The words hung in the air. You could hear someone drop a pen. No one moved to pick it up. Richard's eyes darted from face to face around the table. He searched for support, for a raised eyebrow, a protest, a challenge. Nothing. The chief financial officer avoided his gaze. The senior partner beside him kept staring at the documents. Two board members who had always nodded at everything Richard said now sat unusually still, because they all knew it was true, and some of them had quietly helped make it happen. Over the past year, several board members had grown concerned. Profits were steady, but innovation had slowed. Younger employees were leaving for more progressive firms. Opportunities in tech and global markets had been dismissed too quickly. They believed the company needed new leadership, someone innovative, someone forward-thinking, someone who listened before speaking, someone who didn't run meetings through intimidation or sarcasm. Maya represented change, not chaos. Change. Richard leaned back slowly, as if the weight of 3 decades had just settled on his shoulders. The room that once felt like his kingdom now felt unfamiliar. Maya met his eyes. There was no anger in her expression, no revenge, no satisfaction, just composure. "I understand this may be surprising," she said, her tone respectful but confident. "Transitions like this always are. But I assure you, I'm here to grow this company, not tear it down." Her words weren't dramatic. They weren't aggressive. They were measured, strategic. She wasn't there to humiliate him. She was there to lead. For a brief moment, something shifted in Richard's expression. Not acceptance, not yet. but realization. The power dynamic had changed. Not because she demanded it, not because she argued, but because she had prepared, planned, and executed flawlessly. For the first time that morning, Richard had nothing to say. No sharp reply, no Kutindimark, no laughter, just silence. And in that silence, everyone in the boardroom understood something clearly. The era of unquestioned authority was over, and a new chapter had begun. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. The tension everyone expected never exploded. There were no dramatic firings, no divenimos, no quiet escort to the elevator. Maya didn't fire Richard. She didn't sideline him. She didn't embarrass him publicly, even though she easily could have referenced his behavior in that first meeting. And she certainly didn't treat him the way he had treated her. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She led. On her second day as chairwoman, she scheduled individual meetings with every department head, not to criticize, but to listen. She asked questions Richard had rarely asked. What's slowing your team down? If you had the authority, what would you change? Where are we missing opportunities? People were cautious at first. They expected hidden traps behind her calm tone, but there weren't any. Within 2 weeks, she introduced new technology systems that streamlined operations. Outdated manual reporting processes were replaced with real-time data dashboards. Investment tracking became more transparent. Teams that once waited days for approvals now received responses within hours. Efficiency improved almost immediately. Then she expanded the company's investment strategy into emerging markets, sectors Richard had once dismissed as too risky or too early. Renewable energy startups, fintech platforms in developing regions, minority-owned businesses with scalable potential. Her strategy wasn't reckless. It was calculated, data-backed, forward-thinking, and it worked. She also launched something no one expected from a major investment firm, a structured mentorship program. Young professionals, especially those from underrepresented communities, were paired with senior leaders. Workshops were held. Leadership training was offered. Interns were invited to speak in strategy sessions. For the first time, many employees felt seen, heard, valued, and profits, they didn't fall. They increased significantly. The next quarterly report showed a revenue jump that surprised even the most skeptical board members. New client acquisitions rose. Employee turnover dropped. Productivity climbed. The atmosphere inside the company changed. Meetings became collaborative instead of confrontational. People spoke without fear of being dismissed. Ideas were debated, not silenced. Even clients noticed. One longtime investor commented, "There's a different energy here. It feels alive." Richard noticed it too. At first, he observed quietly. He attended meetings without dominating them. He watched Maya navigate difficult negotiations with calm precision. He saw how she gave credit to her team publicly and took responsibility privately. Leadership, he realized, didn't have to be loud to be strong. One afternoon, after a particularly successful quarterly review where profits exceeded projections by nearly 18%, Richard knocked gently on Maya's office door. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She gestured for him to come in. For a moment, he stood there, searching for words, something that had rarely happened in his career. "I misjudged you," he admitted quietly. There was no audience, no Boardroom, just honesty. Maya looked at him steadily and nodded. "You judged what you saw," she replied, "not what I built." The sentence was simple, but it landed deeply. For decades, Richard believed leadership looked one way, sounded one way, came from one type of person, someone older, louder, more traditional, someone who resembled the leaders he had grown up admiring. Maya didn't fit that image, yet she had outperformed it. She didn't argue her way into respect. She didn't demand validation. She demonstrated competence, vision, results. And slowly, Richard began to understand something that years of success had never taught him.